Welcome to the Femsplainers. I'm Christina Hoff Summers.
And I'm Danielle Crittenden. And welcome back. I have bad news for you, Christina.
What could that be?
We cannot avoid talking about abortion this week. I mean, everybody's talking about it, obviously. And I don't want to talk about it to bring nothing new to the table on this conversation. But I think
there was this feminist that I love, Julie Bindel, a very difficult male-averse feminist in London. And
male-averse.
She refuses to talk about the wage gap because, in her words, I refuse to talk about it because it's so ass-clutchingly boring.
Well, that's true.
And I had to think that I agreed with her on that. So it's not that it's boring, but it's just
divisive. It's demoralizing. And I have, I think I identify. In fact, I know I identify with the majority, but I have great sympathy and admiration for those on the pro-life side. I think there are excellent arguments, but what we've seen in Alabama has got obviously everybody up in arms, including even if Pat Robertson is against it, you've maybe gone too far.
Did you see The Birdcage?
The Casual Fall movie, yes.
The Casual Fall movie. And do you remember when the Nathan Lane character is posing as a conservative woman, but he's dressed in drag?
Yeah, for the parents' dinner. Yeah.
And he wants to impress Gene Hackman, and he says something like...
And Gene Hackman is a Republican?
Like a right-wing Republican.
Yeah.
And he says I'm in favor of executing the mothers. And Gene Hackman just, is so ecstatic. And this is the Nathan Lane character posing as a right-wing woman, said, yes, and then if we let, you'll say, we shouldn't let the fetus be killed, because if you kill the mother, you kill the fetus. Well, of course, the fetus will be killed anyway if an abortion, so why don't we let it go down with the ship? And I heard the Alabama case.
It would make things so much easier, No, get rid of all of them.
They want to kill the mothers. No, seriously, not kill the mothers, but they want the father, not the fathers. They want the abortionist to be subject to felony charges and make it the serious felony, and it's ridiculous.
Yeah, we've got Zoe's away this week, but we have Jane Knight in the studio in Zoe Appler's place. Just give us a quick highlight, Jane, of the facts of this Alabama, just in case they're not all seared into everybody's brain at this point.
It's punishable as a Class A felony, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, it is.
For the abortionist, not the mothers.
Abortion doctor.
Yeah, for the doctors.
Yeah.
So it's going to take immediate action in 6 months. It came right after Georgia's heartbeat bill. And it's enacted by a female governor, nonetheless, Governor Kay Ivey. It's extremely controversial. And, the original sponsor of the bill was previously said that the supporters of the bill expected to be challenged in the courts, but it's moving forward very fast. And it's just something that I think it takes everyone aback and shock, especially with the rape and incest.
Right. There are no exceptions for rape and incest. And it is the most extreme of all the recent state actions to limit abortion. And it's also, as we know, it's not as it seems just a ploy to get rid of abortion in Alabama. But now that there is a seemingly conservative majority on the Supreme Court, they're now rolling out these cases to overturn Roe v. Wade. So it's going to be... Obviously, it's not imminent because it's going to be challenged. But Christina, when we were talking about this before the show and thinking, how are we going to deal with this? You had some interesting insights that it's not just men and it's not just white men doing this. I think we don't appreciate, and it's wrong to say this is something being imposed by men. I mean, as Jane points out, Governor Kay Ivey signed it.
And a majority of men and women in Alabama approve of this law.
Yeah.
And if you look at the national statistics, what you find is about the same number. I think it's 19%, according to the Reuters poll. 19% of men and women in the country
are opposed of all,
and including from cases of rape, where there was rape and incest. So it's not a gender issue in that sense that it's men waging war against women. So ladies, take your Handmaid's Tale costumes.
We got to fight the women too.
You got to fight the women too.
Right. It's like they're putting on the Handmaid's Tale costume. Really,
A little too fast. So take them off. It's another issue. It's actually sort of secular against more Well,
it's also. I mean, this is. I think we talked about this in the past. I can't remember which episode, but what is sad, and maybe I don't know if there's any bright side to come out of this, if there are going to be legal challenges, it's that when Roe v. Wade was decided by the court, it kind of shut down an organic national discussion that was going on about abortion at the time. And it imposed an overarching law that has really resulted in the polarization of opinion ever since.
Absolutely.
Those who are pro-life feel, that from high, they were this horrible thing was imposed on them, and from the pro-abortion side or pro-choice side, it's like now a constitutional right at any time. I mean, there was, and so I fall in the middle where you think, yeah, we need it, but you don't want it to be as a case in Canada decided some years ago. There's, as far as I know, still true that some midwives botched a delivery, and it went all the way to Canada's Supreme Court that these women had, done something wrong, and that this baby had died, and they were kind of responsible for the fact that this baby had died literally while being born. And the Supreme Court ruled that until the baby was physically out of the woman, it was not entitled to any kind of rights. So I think
I kind of sympathize with that.
Really? Why?
Well,
what about a woman who's pregnant and is murdered, and like Sharon Tate, and her baby is murdered too?
Yeah.
Should that carry extra consequences?
To hell with the murders.
but
murder.
No. But the point is that I think there's
But I just didn't want people to go after midwives who made mistakes.
Well, you know what? Maybe they should, like doctors with malpractice. We have to talk about midwives. We have to save that for another episode.
I don't know about midwives.
So on take the drugs, ladies.
Take the drugs,
the epidural, and go to a hospital.
Go to a hospital.
Okay, so from your 19%, so people who favor legal abortion under all circumstances. This is interesting. Well, 26% men, 31% women. So that's fairly close, too. So men and women track together, which means 50% of Americans want some limit between the first heartbeat and coming out of the birth canal. And maybe it would be great if we could have a conversation that amounted to some sort of humane reckoning of a fetus at a certain point, and also the late-term abortions that are genuinely so grisly. I mean, if they don't have to be done
I do think that many are done that don't have to be done.
Right. Like,
what woman would allow a pregnancy to go to 8 months and then say, oh, I don't think I want it? I mean, that would be very unusual. Usually there's a complicating factor in that it's threatening her life or the...
Right. Right. But you can see that you would want or the 20-week abortion or the 22-week. That can get a little, after I think the first trimester, you could start to discuss limitations that would not be unreasonable.
And why can't we have a reasonable discussion? I mean, I'm not particularly religious. I think you sort of have to be religious to have a strong pro-life view.
The Monty Python view, every sperm is sacred, meaning of life.
But I respect that and understand it and realize that a lot of my fellow citizens do not share my sort of utilitarian analysis. And so I would seek a compromise, a humane compromise. It doesn't subject some poor girl who's a month pregnant to having to go through with it. But on the other hand, would not allow for late-term abortions, except in the rarest of cases. I can understand making a compromise because we live in a pluralistic society, and the whole idea is that you vote or you defer to courts, and this is what our democracy consists of.
Right, and a majority want to see some sort of abortion law,
Right.
that's humane.
Right.
But we can't talk about it if on the pro-abortion side,
Yeah.
if they are wedded to the abortion at any time under any circumstance, and the anti-abortion side is never, from the time the sperm enters the woman, can we
Even while you're flirting in the bar,
you're playing in the bar. You're just a spark in your daddy's eye. You can't do it. Like that's not a rule for anybody. But I think the thing that this is something that really bothers me. If especially if you're religious and pro-life, that you hear that they will not support abortion when there's rape or incest. And to me, that imagine a 12-year-old girl raped by her stepfather. Not uncommon. But also, if you're raped by a stranger, why are you, as a religious, compassionate person, condemning the victim in this to carrying the baby of a evil person? If we want to put it in biblical terms, it's evil, and you are
Rosemary's Baby.
It's you could just say that was a work of Satan, and we can't allow this to go through, and the punishment,
The literal spawn of Satan.
and the punishment on the victim to have to live with this for 9 months and give birth to this, and then I'm just horrified by that. I mean, just from a non-utilitarian viewpoint, I don't get that. And then as we see in just in the women who are unfortunately find themselves fortunately pregnant and don't have the resources don't want the baby, the expense all falls on them. The life sink of what it's going to take to bring that baby to term falls on them. And we can philosophically debate whether she should do it or not, but I think there are religious reasons to support some sort of humane abortion compromise.
I think the majority of people in the country agree with that, even the religious people. Some constraints at both extremes, not to go to either extreme. Abortion on demand anytime, or no abortion even with rape and
flirtation.
I just have an odd question to ask about
What?
Men's right to abortion. I read an article by some philosophers and Kathy Young that men, imagine if your son, ladies out there with sons, knocks up a girl, God forbid, and then he doesn't want it, he's not ready for it, but she decides to have it. In many states, he would be responsible for supporting it the rest until it was 21. And it just occurred to me that why haven't women's groups or, gender equity groups said that men should have the reproductive rights, and if a woman has a baby, he should have a right to say, I do not want to be a parent. I did not consent
to opt out.
Opt out.
No, I think that's right. I don't. I get the point of men should never have an opinion on this. It's not their bodies. I get that.
Their bodies, they will have to work.
No, but I get
until it's 21.
And if it's, and sometimes you get these sort of heartbreaking situations where it's a couple that's been together for many years, and the woman says, "I'm not ready for the baby," and he's like, "That's my child too. I want to help." There are men who want to be part of it, and
you can never force someone to have a baby.
No, of course not.
So men should never have that right. But I think they should have the right
to opt out of support.
And they can have no rights to having any interference with a child's life, but no responsibilities. But in most states, a guy, he could be 18 and get someone pregnant, and then for the rest of his life he has to support it, even though he didn't want it.
Yeah.
It would just make a little more sense.
What happens when trans men start having babies? Maybe then we'll see.
Oh, my God.
A lot.
In fact, this whole abortion debate is
this kind of it is transphobic. Men can get pregnant, too.
Yes, they can.
Yeah. Okay, well, we have as they said, the old Ed Sullivan show, a very, very big shoe tonight. Very, very big shoe. We have Vicky Ward, who is the New York Times best-selling author, investigative journalist and magazine columnist coming in to talk about her recent book, Kushner, Inc., The Extraordinary Story of Jared Kushner and Ivanka Trump. I've known Vicky for some years. She's an amazing journalist. And she tried to give us an insight into the whole
Javanka
empire, but also world and, where they've come from and what they're really up to. And I found it really interesting and put a lot of stuff for me in perspective.
I downloaded it from Audible and couldn't stop listening.
Yeah.
I just don't know. They're both enigmatic to me. I don't know who
they are enigmatic. Yeah.
And they have influence, but you don't really know who they are.
Or what the influence is. And one of the things she explores is how much we think of Ivanka as having huge amounts of influence on Trump. But in fact, you find out maybe not.
Maybe not. And maybe it's not so moderating.
Right.
Maybe they have their own agenda. I don't know. I still don't know. And I think Vicky would say it's still a bit of a mystery.
Right.
But she has a lot of information.
And she's from that world herself, Vicky. So that New York social real estate world. So we'll talk to her. So let's bring Vicky on. Welcome, Vicky, to the Femsplainers.
Thank you for having me, Danielle.
And Vicky requested not a cocktail before she came on the show, but I sort of put it like a nice Cabernet, correct?
Correct.
And so we found, I've had this before, this is really, really good. It's called Faust. And given the fact that we're going to talk about Jared and Ivanka, it's sort of, there seems to have been a lot of Faustian bargains they've made, and we can discuss that. But welcome.
Thank you.
So, Jared and Ivanka.
Yes.
Before the White House, after the White House, was there a transformation?
So I think the main theme of the book, if you like, is that they were in disguise in a way. And what's happened once they've got to Washington is they've been exposed. The disguise has been peeled off them, and we see them for who they truly are. In New York, I think that they're brilliant publicists. They're all about messaging, and I think that the messaging really worked for them, which is why they were invited to all the sort of glamorous parties. They had an incredibly glamorous life. They were perceived as the more sophisticated, poised, moderate, more thoughtful versions of their fathers, of their respective fathers, to whom they were always compared. And that contrast and that image as the sort of the younger, better generation, it really worked for them until they came to Washington.
And then what happened?
Actually,
history.
When people talk about like presidential campaigns and, oh my gosh, they're so brutal and they're so, fake and they have to appeal to the television things. But I find that whole process with the debates and everything, as you say, people's exteriors get ripped off. And if you can survive a Washington, political campaign and coming here and still come out as a good person, as many people still do. But you're right. I mean, there's something that they couldn't hide when they got here. But go back a little. So Vicky, you've lived in New York. You've been an observer of a Boswell of New York.
22 years. I know it doesn't sound like it, but
No.
and I'm American.
Right. So if you were Edith Wharton and
Yes.
you were looking at the Kushners and the Trumps, and you talked about the respective fathers, obviously we know about Donald, but Charlie Kushner, tell us where those senior families Who were they? Where do they fit into the larger New York developer world?
Right. So I think, what's so interesting about the Kushners and the Trumps is their similarities, actually, as much as their differences. There is this very strong theme running through the Kushner family and the Trump family that rules really are for other, perhaps poorer people. Mm-hmm. And whilst I think, people know about how much, Donald Trump has historically liked to sue people and likes to litigate and, likes a fight, people know much less about the Kushners' history. And I think what's really fascinating about it is that the reason they believe that rules are for other people starts actually in a very legitimate way, because it begins in Belarus, now Poland, in the Holocaust. And the Kushner grandparents, Ray and Joseph Kushner, didn't just sort of survive the Holocaust by waiting it out, as other people did. They really had to fight to survive in horrific circumstances. Ray Kushner, Jared's grandmother, had to, dig a tunnel to escape from a ghetto and then join a band of other Jewish survivors who were hiding in the woods in absolutely freezing temperatures. And when she and Joseph Kushner, who she had known as a teenager, when the war finally ended, they were still trapped in Europe for several years before they could make it over, then with one child, first to Brooklyn, then to New Jersey. They were forced into the building trade because they didn't speak the language. It was very common for a lot of the Holocaust survivors to go into construction. But Joseph Kushner became part of a group of families known as the Builders in New Jersey because they were all Holocaust survivors. They came, and between them, they transformed what had been really agricultural land into the suburbs it is today. But Joseph and Ray Kushner, and Ray Kushner gave a fascinating interview before she died, talked about the fact that all the joy had really gone from their lives because of what had happened. And other Kushner grandchildren talked to me for the book and explained that this mentality that rules were being dangerous really then carried on to the next generation. And so you have Jared's father, Charlie Kushner, who's the youngest of Ray and Joseph's 4 children, but the one who who was by far the most ambitious. He was the one who wanted to take Joe's construction business and turn it into an enormous real estate development company, which he did. I mean, he very, very quickly, he used a lot of leverage, but very quickly, by the 1990s, he owned more real estate in New Jersey, I think, than any other developer. But that wasn't, he wanted to put the Kushners on the map. He talked about wanting to be the Jewish Kennedys. So, it's a complicated story. He was an extraordinarily philanthropic man. He single-handedly created the Jewish community in Livingston. But with that generosity, there came a sort of backhanded side. He would hire a lot of the people who worked in the synagogue or in the mikveh, which meant that in a strange way, he owned them. And as time went by and Charlie Kushner wanted to give money to politicians, actually mostly Democrats, he's always been a very staunch Zionist. He invited Bibi Netanyahu to come and speak 4 times. This was not inexpensive. Netanyahu charged $100,000 a pop, and he came to speak 4 times. He would always stay with the Kushners. So Charlie Kushner, whose company he had created quite a brutal, authoritarian culture at Kushner companies. The Tuesday meetings at his house became nicknamed the Tuesday beatings. People were terrified to disagree with him.
They've just moved them to the White House.
Yes,
basically.
I know. They were terrified of him. It was during the era of the Tuesday beatings people were not allowed to go to the bathroom for 3 hours. People were accused, if they had a Mont Blanc pen, for example, of being anti-Semitic, of carrying Nazi paraphernalia.
Oh, it's like if you drive a Mercedes
exactly.
or something. These were companies that worked with
exactly.
the Nazis.
And it became known very quickly that under Charlie Kushner's, regime as CEO at Kushner Companies, you were not to keep a paper trail. Very similar to Donald Trump in that regard. And the reason he didn't want a paper trail was because he was busy moving money to pay for these politicians to come to speak, to promote the Kushner name. And he was taking money from his partners in the various LLC. Real estate developers tend to put each of their assets listed as an LLC. And his 3 siblings had inherited equal shares of the LLCs along with him. He had other partners, and he thought, as he became more and more successful, he didn't need to bother to tell his partners what he was doing with their money. And this, of course, is what led to his rather infamous downfall, because his siblings wound up suing him. And the family civil suit spilled into the public domain and caught the attention of the then U.S. attorney in New Jersey, Chris Christie, who had political ambitions of his own. And Charles Kushner he was the chief donor to the then governor of Jim McGreevey. And Charles Kushner, they had gone to Israel together. Israel was where McGreevey had met the man who became his secret gay lover. Mm-hmm. And Charles Kushner had housed Golan Sipel. Charles Cullen had given him the work visa to come and work in this country, and this man was then put on the McGreevey gubernatorial payroll, and he had as security, he had no expertise in any of this. And Chris Christie started to investigate all of this and Charles Kushner. And Charles Kushner had an interesting private life that was very at odds with the image of himself that he had created, that of the sort of pious leader, this leader of the Jewish community in Livingston, and he didn't want the secrets of his personal life spilling into the public domain. And I think that is why, it's never really been explained, but it's why he snapped and he hired, in this terrible sting, he hired a prostitute to sleep with his brother-in-law, and then made a video, filmed it, sent the video to his sister, who, because she was cooperating with the feds against him as a witness. And,
happens in every family.
Yeah. but I think that the reason, this is all really sordid stuff, but the reason it's important is that, once he'd done that and he was arrested, I quote a family friend, Alan Hammer, as saying in the book, well, he realised he had to plead guilty because he couldn't stand in front of a jury and tell them what a good guy he was after that. But the other reason is because he didn't want his personal secrets being aired in court, which was what Chris Christie and his team threatened to do. They would have what's called a speaking indictment. So all these facets of his life that might not have necessarily been relevant to the case could be used to embarrass him. And the reason, and that is why, very uncharacteristically, he folded. And Jim McGreevey came out and resigned as governor around the same time. The reason all of this matters is that Jared Kushner, who was then in his 20s and was the apple of his father's eye and very much being groomed to be his successor in real estate, lived that experience not with the view that my father broke the law and he needed to go to jail to pay the price, but he lived that experience as that he saw it as exactly what you just said, Danielle, as a family quarrel that had quite wrongly been pursued by Chris Christie and the feds. It had no business being a matter of law. Mm-hmm. And he thought the whole thing was extraordinarily unfair. And I think it's really important. He also had very strong opinions about Chris Christie after all of that, which, of course, would then come to play out many years later in
the brutal dumping of
the transition.
Yeah.
But I think you have to understand the mentality that Jared then has from a very early age, that laws have hurt his family. They're bad things. You also have to understand that not only now was the onus on him to assume the mantle of running the real estate family, but there was tremendous pressure on him to avenge the family's reputation, to avenge what had happened, to fix things.
Well, that's fascinating. And one of the things I was struck by reading the book, well, a couple of things. First of all, that Holocaust analogy, which was, look what happened the last time we followed rules. But that was his grandparents' generation. And while I can understand that certain survival, tactics were passed down, what we've seen it evolved, and as you describe in the book, when you put it in the context of politics, that they are everybody there who is a businessman, from the president to the Kushners to others who have come to the administration not from political backgrounds, are from these business backgrounds, and it's not even like they're trying to collude, or they just don't even understand the basic rules of what you don't do. It's like they're following the ethics of New York City real estate circles, but then are sort of shocked when it's not really good to talk to foreign countries when you might be having business with them.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's a really interesting point. And, Gary, although I think that it's important to probably draw a distinction between the people who came to the administration, the sort of people I would classify as the grown-ups, who had worked at major corporations, like Rex Tillerson.
Yeah, Tillerson came from a business background, but even he got this is not normal.
No, and Gary Cohn, having been president of Goldman Sachs, he understood that, when he was at Goldman Sachs, he'd had the experience that the most important person you phone every day when you're in a position like that is your general counsel. Mm-hmm. And he had not worked with Jared and Ivanka before, and I think he was very taken aback very quickly in the transition because his office was right next to Jared's, and so he could see that Jared was never in it, which number one troubled him because he's like, well, where is he? And when he asked Jared Kushner's assistant, Avi Berkowitz, well, where is he? Avi didn't know. He said, well, he's in a meeting that says secret. And he knew that, he could see Donald Trump, who was busy interviewing candidates for the administration. So Gary Cohn found Jared's behavior worrisome right from the get-go and said to Jared, whatever you may have felt free to do when you were in a family real estate business, you're not free to do now. Everything you do is legally discoverable. You shouldn't be having any meetings without taking a lawyer or someone, a witness. And Jared, because he's come from this entitled world, a family real estate heir, really who, by the way, actually wasn't particularly versed in details and wasn't actually as good at real estate as his father. Was known within Kushner companies as being a delegator and not being particularly detail-oriented, not being particularly good with the numbers. He didn't really know or seem to want to know what Gary Cohn was saying to him. And of course, you see how it plays out, because famously, he obviously didn't understand the importance of filling out his security clearance form correctly.
Or at least being fully transparent on it.
Right. Well, putting any of the meetings he'd had in
none of your business.
I just want to ask you one thing about his relationship with his father.
Yes.
And to me, he's an enigma. I don't know what to think of him, but maybe bad things but come to mind. But overall, defending your father, there's something human about that that makes me sympathetic. And like even in Game of Thrones, which I'm not allowed to talk about on this podcast.
Forbidden
but Cersei,
topic.
the one thing good about her, she loved her children. Because there are villains in literature, like in Trollope's The Way We Live Now. There was Augustus Melmotte, and he didn't care about anybody but himself. But Jared cares about his father. Mm-hmm. And there's something... And then this father who was the child of Holocaust survivors.
Yes.
And there's just something poignant about that.
It's incredibly human.
Yeah.
Almost Shakespearean, actually.
Yes.
And I think that the issue that I think my book raises for readers is that there is nothing wrong with loving your father, and there's nothing wrong with thinking that what happened to him was unfair. The issue becomes when you stop being a New York businessman and you move to the White House. And then I suppose the question that the book asks is, if you have this mentality that laws are bad, that Chris Christie, the guy who locked your father up, must be eliminated, and all the work, by the way, that he's done on the transition eliminated, thereby throwing the transition into chaos. Is that going to be a problem? And you have to remember that the huge hold that Charlie Kushner has over his son is chiefly problematic in my telling of it, because Jared enters the White House carrying Charlie's financial problems. Mm-hmm. And
giving him new ones.
Right. and so the issue then becomes, if you believe that it's one set of rules for you and a different set of rules for everyone else, and you're Jared Kushner, you've put yourself in charge of foreign outreach on the transition, you then start to have secret meetings with your dad to try and save this building in New York, 666 Fifth Avenue, where the clock is ticking, and a loan of
huge albatross of debt that they were desperately scrambling for money for.
$1.4 billion, and they've got till February 2019 to find
the Chinese are helpfully reaching out to them. And
nobody, by the way, wanted to help them till Donald Trump said he was running for president.
Right.
And then suddenly, for all the wrong reasons, foreign money comes knocking. Now, if you're someone who thinks, well, I need to abide by ethics and by rules. If you're Jared Kushner, you say, okay, I want to go into the White House, then I should sell all my assets. But he and Ivanka don't think like that. He told Gary Cohn throughout the transition, gosh, going into government is so expensive. So Gary Cohn and Rex Tillerson, both very wealthy men, thought, quite wrongly, that Jared was doing what they were doing, which was actually to divest of everything.
Do you have to divest, or or can you put them in a blind trust, or
No, you're supposed to. The president obviously put his stuff in a blind trust. You're not supposed to go in with any stocks or shares, precisely because if you have, if you can make yourself a target, if you have conflicts of interest, and both by Ivanka Trump holding on to her fashion line, which particularly became very reliant on foreign business because all the
Chinese trademarks. No, the business she closed, but she continues to get Chinese trademarks.
Yes, and she kept it for an astonishingly long time.
Right.
She sort of had to be shamed.
And the sales had to go down through boycotts as well, which happened.
Well, sales went down through boycotts, but then what she would do is put herself on the phone and in the room with all these foreign leaders, and this Rex Tillerson and the people running the State Department were horrified because they thought it was so inappropriate. Not because she said anything inappropriate on those calls.
She edged in on like the Japanese prime minister where there was some deal going on for her company.
But then, to your point, she would then suddenly be awarded trademarks, her business would, by those companies, and the appearance of,
and at very quick rates too. Like there was.
Is that still going on?
No. So eventually, about 18 months in, the summer of 2018, she closed it, and I think by then, truth be told, that not only was business bad domestically, but it was impossible for her to get business abroad too. But as to your point,
really, even in Asia, I thought she.
Well, the trademarks keep
going.
In.
Yeah.
But as you may also remember, she was busy putting together. She was trying to work on domestic policy, and she was working on the expansion of the childcare tax credit. And she actually achieved that, but she got an awful lot of blowback because at the same time, her own fashion label was employing absolutely appalling labour practices in places like China. Mm-hmm. So, and given that what Ivanka cares about, she herself has written this, perception is far more important than reality.
Yeah.
I think that
the motto,
even for her publicity skills, carrying on this, trying to keep pushing that there were no conflicts there was just too difficult.
Well, let's go back to your original point about Washington kind of pulling off the outer latex human face and revealing the space alien within, or the claws or whatever. What I took away from your book was that service to the country should not mean any sacrifice on their part. And then in time after time, whether it's the bigger things of divesting yourself or being your vacation being inconvenienced,
They didn't want their vacations.
Yeah, so what they loved was, and maybe this was what was going on in New York, they loved being this golden couple. And if doing something meaningful was writing a book about women's empowerment, or going to a gala and wearing a nice dress and giving money, that was one thing. But when it came to putting yourself on the line and making real sacrifices, that seemed to be something that they were just not just not prepared for, but simply unwilling to do.
Yes. Amazingly kind of ignorant, actually. And I think what's particularly interesting is that even the things that one ought to give them credit for. So in Jared's case, the criminal justice reform,
right?
It's so self-serving,
right? Talk about these Shakespearean threads.
Yes, when have they done something that isn't about self-interest?
I disagree that was. Just what happens is that if you have someone who's in jail, you have an immediate education and how terrible and unfair and unjust. So that seems to me to be to his credit. And Van Jones at CNN, it gives him credit for that.
No, and I give him credit in the book. It's just the fact that when it is, that it does bear it has a direct relation. It's something. His father, who seems to really control Jared, wanted him to do? If he's going to go into government for public service, wouldn't it be nice to see him doing something for the good of the country? And I'm not suggesting criminal justice, that obviously is for the good of the country, but that didn't happen to have
Right.
a benefit.
There's nothing that he will do
for
that's
Jared
separate.
or one of Jared's businesses. And, it was noticeable, Gary Cohn again observed when they were trying to talk about shaping the healthcare repeal and replace, that Jared really didn't want to discuss options that wouldn't benefit his brother's healthcare business, which is a huge multi-billion healthcare business that does, by the way, it is predicated on Obamacare. It would not work if, for example, we suddenly came up with a single-payer health system. Mm-hmm. And Jared was very quick to discuss anything, and people noticed it and talked about it, anything that would be negative to his brother's business. And in the same way, I think that one of the most shocking things in the book is actually when the White House visitor logs get closed because Jared is doing all this wheeler dealing. And he's meeting with Lloyd Blankfein, among other people, who was then an investor in a company that Jared had not only not divested from, he hadn't even disclosed his investment. These are things we've just not seen before in a White House. And the excuse that was given, and the other problem is the complete lack of transparency. The excuse that was given at the time was that the White House visitor logs were closed for security reasons. I mean, that was absolute rubbish. A year later, John Kelly, when he was chief of staff, reopened them. And it was only then that the press understood who had been going in and who had been coming out, and the complete inappropriateness of it all.
Can we go to Ivanka?
Yes, but can I just ask one quick question about he's an Orthodox Jew, modern Orthodox, and now Ivanka converted. And this is the one thing that's strange to me. You're an Orthodox Jew, so you are making sacrifices. It's not easy to live by the rules of Orthodox Judaism.
No, not even a little bit.
My family in Borough Park, they do it to the T, and it's arduous, but it does make ethics central to your life. The 10 Commandments, thou shalt not steal, and you honor your mother and father, all of that. And how does that... even my mother, who's like beyond, my late mother, beyond socialist, and hates... she wanted to live to see him, Trump, carried out of the White House, in a straitjacket. But she always thought that Jared was a nice boy because he was, he had a kippah.
Well, I'm going to answer that question for you because Christopher Hitchens had a wonderful line, which is whenever some very pious evangelical would come out, he would say you could set your watch by the scandal that was going to engulf this. Whether it's sex with the pool boys or whatever. And Orthodox Jews are, human. Especially they're human.
But he's not ultra-Orthodox.
Well,
he's a modern Orthodox. But at least you when you're an Orthodox,
you would have expected better. But I'm afraid everyone's... I want to get to Ivanka, if that's okay, because we spent a lot of time on Jared. And one of the things I wanted to ask is... It seems, and you seem to agree with this in your book, that when she was doing her business before politics, that whatever she was a tireless worker. She was really hands-on, devoted to detail, seemed to be a success at what she was doing. And then when she gets to the White House, she's seen as, and quoting what you gathered from talking to people, is flighty, an attention grabber, and her office, the home of bad ideas.
Yeah.
So what? I mean, I'm presuming that both she and Jared just thought that they could bring whatever acumen they had in the business world to the political and policy world.
Well, I think it's more complicated than that because, so I think what happens is that, when Ivanka gets to the White House, she does get exposed. And while she did certainly back in New York work very hard, I think that what was not clear, and is perhaps clearer now, is how this idea of her as being completely independent, successful businesswoman in her own right is perhaps not so. She and her brothers were very much controlled by Donald Trump, are very much controlled by Donald Trump. They all, as I explain in the book, the way that deals got done under his watch was the children would talk to somebody abroad, wander into his office and say, oh, so-and-so would make a good partner. And often these people, especially actually in Ivanka's case, she did deals where the Trump organization ended up partnering with money launderers. In one case, they found themselves connected to the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. And a lot of these deals failed. Once she got to Washington, no one had ever looked at these deals. They were all put under the microscope. And so was her training. I mean, one of the things I talk about is how the fact that her, part-time mentor was Felix Sater, who has been to jail, is an FBI asset. And, she is not someone who she would probably want the public to know she had any association with, let alone was taught that, how to do real estate. So I think that what happens in a way in the reporting of my book is that when she gets to Washington, we see how actually incredibly dependent on her father she really is for her identity, for her status, and economically. I mean, the truth of the matter is, as is pointed out by Leonard Stern, who's a old-time rival of Trump's in New York, that Donald Trump gives his children remarkably little equity in his assets, particularly given his age. In Washington, for example, it was Ivanka brought in the deal, but he gave them 7% each. That was it, of the hotel here. So
one truly profitable property.
So no wonder she was so desperate for the fashion brand to work, because it was one thing that was exclusively owned by her. So I think, and you see her struggling still. Gary Cohn says to her when they're discussing the Paris Climate Accord, in which she's let it be known she really thinks America should stay in the Paris Climate Accord during the transition. She's met with Al Gore. She's been given a DVD by Leonardo DiCaprio, for whatever that's worth. And Gary Cohn says, look, I'm running around trying to bring business leaders like Jamie Dimon into the White House. You could just go and have a quiet word with your dad and make this easier for the rest of us. Yeah. And she said, no, I just can't do that. And I think that's so telling, because it's so contrary to what she has said in television interviews. She said, I speak very candidly to him in private. But when Gary Cohn asked her to do just that, she couldn't.
Well, he must be a frightening father because of his mood swings. I mean, he's a frightening president.
And he's famously not nice to his children, and yet I put up this incredibly loyal.
Confirm, that he's especially mean to Jared and makes him call him, I don't know if this is still true, but I heard up till 2017 he had to call him Mr. President. He couldn't call him Dad or Donald.
So I do know that he can. I have heard stories that he can be quite unkind to Jared, who has certainly in public had to call him Mr. President. I don't think he always does when they're in private. I have a story.
By the way, I think that's proper, actually.
Yeah, I know you'd be in favor of that.
Yes,
I have to call her normal title.
Madam Producer.
But I think that, I have I think, quite telling anecdote in the book where he's pretty unkind to Ivanka in public. He really humiliates her. When it's after Kellyanne Conway has gone on television and said, go out and buy Ivanka's clothing, go out and buy it, and for which she was reprimanded. But Ivanka stormed into the Oval Office to complain about what Kellyanne had done. And her father, in front of quite a lot of people, said, "Calm down, dear. You sell shoes. Get over it." I mean, it was quite a put down. And the fact that actually, at the end of the day, I mean, the president didn't follow up on it, but he did ask John Kelly to get rid of Jared and Ivanka.
Yeah, what did he say? Get rid of these?
Yes.
Why are they even? I mean, but I think also kindly, like, this was one of the. I want one more question because I want to get your impression, because Melania barely. I mean, she is as mysterious in this book as ever. She is in life. But that in terms of also Donald Trump understanding how their lives and reputations were being destroyed by being there. Because as you pointed out, on the climate change, I mean, she had this idea, she had this image that she would be a moderating, civilized force on her father in the eyes of that kind of society and celebrity. And so not only did she fail them on climate change, she failed them on the LGBTQ rights.
Right.
She failed them on advancing women's rights around the world. She didn't stand up when the anti-Semitism stuff was going on. So
she denied what he'd said about Charlottesville,
right?
And the Muslim the travel ban. She actually wasn't that bothered about it until she got caught in a public relations scandal. Because what happened was, so when the travel ban came out, she was actually quite comfortable with it. But the problem was, then if you remember, there were scenes of mayhem in airports everywhere. And then Ivanka, in a very timid way, posted a photograph of herself and Jared going to a black tie gala dinner. Yes. And so the memes that then spread across, social media took on a life of their own. That's when Ivanka said, "Oh, Dad," but because it's not good for her reputation. I'm not sure that she has an ideology.
Right, but so let's say she squandered all that.
Right.
And Jared has, for all his father's aspirations of the Jewish Kennedys, I mean, his business is under intense legal scrutiny.
Yes.
And things are piling up in the Southern District of New York.
Yes.
Like, they're going to be in litigation for years. So in a way that this Faustian bargain, the thing that both of them wanted.
Bargain, did they expect to win?
Well, no, but I mean, now that they have won their behavior, is it's all going to blow up when they go back to New York. I mean, what happens?
Well, they're going to be like international celebrities.
I don't know.
No.
Josh and Carly Kloss actually turn out to be the legit what Jared and Ivanka want to be, that Josh is legitimately a business genius and made his money. And Carly Kloss does do incredible charitable work for
and she also
young
has
women.
Clearly very fixed ideology, and that, that she doesn't need anyone's approval.
Right.
She goes out and does it. I think it's so interesting, this, right? What next for them? I mean, it's quite clear from the book that whilst they're in the White House, their Rolodex for networking among the foreign community, who are perhaps less judgmental than a lot of people back in New York, is expanding rapidly. And so I doubt that, when they do leave Washington, I doubt they'll have lost the friendship of their new friends.
Yeah, but do you want to be big in Azerbaijan, or do you want
no,
you want to be at the Met Gala?
What I mean is that I don't think their access to capital will dry up, but I certainly don't think they're going to be invited to the Met Gala. I think, unfortunately, that New York being New York, there is probably a very, very, very small group of tin-eared fellow inheritors who probably are fairly clueless as to what's really going on in the world right now, who will probably welcome them back with open arms. But I think that the more aware people, certainly the media world, which they were very much fated by and admired by, those people will not want them want them back. The people in New York, and there is a contingent for whom money matters more than everything else.
Wait a minute. I'm surprised there's a contingent for whom it doesn't matter.
Well, no, but I think, New York is it's a money town, but it's also a media town. Yeah. And I don't think, Jared, the downside of owning the New York Observer is that you expose yourselves to journalists. And
they are the Lady Astors now.
Running the world now?
Yeah, no, they are certainly of New York. Yeah, and he destroyed the Observer. It was a great newspaper.
Right, and the journalists who've worked for him don't have very kind things to say about. Right. They didn't feel he understood the role of journalism. He was very condescending. He doesn't understand why.
Well, he used it again as his personal way of punishing people he didn't like.
Like Chris Hughes, what he did to the New Republic.
Right. But so last quick thing. So did you see, the only time Melania makes an appearance in your book and maybe the world is when Ivanka oversteps herself. Yes. And then it's like Melania knocks her back, like, no, you are not having offices in the East Wing, Did you get any sense of her or her relationship with the family or
yes,
her as a person?
So I'll tell you, it's quite interesting. Quite interesting, number one, that, as you say, the only person who did seem to push back Ivanka with kind of no trouble.
Right.
Actually, it's like swatting a fly.
Yeah.
Was Melania.
All she did is say, back off, girl.
Yes. And, but it is fascinating. Everybody I talked to for this book, whether they were on the right politically or the left, but anybody who'd had anything to do with Melania Trump really liked her. And I think they said that they felt that the president was easier to be around when she was around. It made their jobs much easier. And I think they felt that maybe it was because she stayed in her lane, unlike Jared and Ivanka, who perceived as sort of,
Well, she was reluctant even to merge into her lane at first.
but actually, people, it was really interesting because I was expecting I was also expecting to hear some gossip, actually. But what I got was everybody liked her. It was much better for them when she was around. And that actually, the contrary to some of the sort of gossip that's been out there, that the president was always kind of trying to win her approval, almost puppy-like. Yeah. That he always wanted to impress her. Yeah. So it's quite interesting.
Yeah.
Now, speaking of gossip, I can't let you go because the latest Washington gossip that I heard very recently, and just want to know your opinion, apparently Jared confided to some high-level Washington, D.C. journalist, I can't say who, that he was actually asking for a marriage counselor, that there's serious problems.
No,
in
where
marriage.
did you hear that?
I'm not going to tell you.
Oh.
So, and that there is, let's put it this way, the marriage bed is cold.
I'm glad I don't live in this town.
Christina, you're going to have to tell me your source off air.
Can't tell it. I'll tell you.
Okay. Tell me later.
Listen, I have no comment and no idea, except that it doesn't sound right because, and here's why, the most, I think that Kushner Inc. really tries to prove the theory that these two are phonies, right? They're completely fake. The most real thing about them is their marriage, is their relationship.
And I think their love for their kids.
Yes,
that seems genuine.
I think that...
I mean, not just their love, but their life with their children.
They're so similar in many ways. They're both so obsessed with PR. and how
they're also both
perception.
Survivors of fathers who were just...
Yes.
Tyrants, annihilating personalities.
So many similarities.
I think I would presume they're good parents to their children.
Very. No, I mean, I think that people who work with them, absolutely, the one thing that I never hear them criticize is their parenting, or actually their relationship with each other. They really do. They talk to each other. They bounce ideas off each other. I mean, and back in New York, it was the same. I mean, people who worked with Kushner companies complained that Ivanka was overly involved. So I would be, listen, I mean, I'm not surprised by anything anymore as I get older, but I would be surprised.
This is high-level Washington, D.C.
All right. Well, Christina, you're going to have to tell me after. But Vicky, thank you so much for stopping by the Femsplainers. And, of course, the book is Kushner, Inc. And we want you to write the next chapter.
So do I.
We don't know what the next chapter is, God knows.
And I'm glad she didn't walk out of the interview. This hard-hitting.
You're hard-hitting. Somebody told me.
If we hadn't had so much of this.
Somebody told me the other night. That's that hard-hitting reporting you're known for, Christina. All right. Well, thank you, Vicky.
Thank you so much, guys.
Christina, can we take a break for a second and talk about OpenFit? Because I have been using this exercise program called OpenFit when we were both traveling, when we were both in California at the same time. I usually work out with a trainer, but I was there for a couple weeks and I had a trainer in my laptop. I could go to the gym in the building and or I didn't have to go to the gym. I could just be in my room and open it up, and there was these amazing workouts all ready to go, and it just kind of saved me when I was down.
And you look fabulous. You keep up with your trainer on OpenFit, and I agree, because thing is, when I travel, I tend to make bad decisions.
No, you don't.
I do. Very bad decisions. And I eat terribly and I don't exercise. But with OpenFit, you have your trainer with you, and you put it on and you're doing your planks and you're yoga.
Doing your cardio. Well, I got very addicted to what they call the 600 seconds, or actually 10-minute workout with Derek. And what I loved about it was you could either just, if you were very busy, okay, 10 minutes, I just want to do cardio, and you would be slaughtered by the end of this. Like, Derek is a very fit man, and he would be going, so you could do this sort of amazing cardio, or you could build. You could do 10-minute upper body, 10-minute lower body, 10-minute cardio. So I just loved that you could mix and match and then do something completely different like yoga or bar.
And you never have time for a 60-minute workout, but you always have time for a 10-minute workout.
You Right.
You can just put it on, make sure you kind of go there 3 or 4 times, and you will be fit.
And it's less, when you think about it, the monthly charge is less than like maybe half or even a quarter of what you would pay an actual trainer for one session. And it's also way less than you would pay to belong to a gym. And you don't need special equipment. You can just do it in your, hotel room, bedroom. But in any case, if our listeners are interested in OpenFit, you can join us on our fitness journey by using our code FEMSPLAIN. Right now, during the OpenFit 30-day challenge, our listeners get a special extended 30-day free trial membership to OpenFit. And they claim, and we're going to try, you can lose up to 15 pounds in 30 days when you text. You have to text FEMSPLAIN to 303030. That's FEMSPLAIN to 303030, and you will get full access to OpenFit, all the workouts, and they have nutrition information and articles totally free. Again, just text, what is it, Christina?
FEMSPLAIN.
To 303030, and you will feel amazing. Well, that was so interesting. I mean, I could just sort of endlessly, I sort of endlessly want to talk about that world of New York society and what really matters, money, reputation.
And just I can't imagine what their life is like in the White House. Do they live in the White House?
No, they live in that Calorama $15,000 a month house. And you don't read the Daily Mail, do you, Christina?
All right, but I don't read the Daily Mail as much as I should. But I want to just remonstrate with you for a moment about something you said in the podcast.
Did I? Oh, I'm sorry.
You denigrated Orthodox Jews.
No, I didn't denigrate them. I just said you can always, quoting Christopher Hitchens, you can always set your clock by the level of piety of someone that they're about to fall down to some scandal.
No, I disagree when it comes to Jewish orthodoxy. That is a discipline, and it requires so much learning. And I stipulate there can be people that go astray. We had that rabbi that
the peeping rabbi in Georgetown.
Sure.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think
That was
any
so
religion
unusual, though.
is.
No religion is exempt. But the fact that Jared and Ivanka choose to live by an Orthodox code,
That should
tells
make
me
them better people. And it doesn't seem to do that.
we don't. I mean, yeah. I can't defend them.
What I think you were saying to me while we were, just as Vicky was leaving, was that you were mad because you at least, I failed to give, and this is true, I failed to give the Orthodox Jews more credit for rigorous following of rules. But this is why Christianity won out over Judaism, because it's so much easier.
Better.
No, I'm not saying, but it's just easier. Like, you can have a personal relationship with Jesus Christ, and you're good.
Just do anything.
But you don't have to worry. Is your silk fiber
drink and smoke and be a sinner?
Are your shirt fibers mixed? Are you buttoning your cloak on the right side? Are you studying Torah all day on Saturday? No, I totally agree with you on that.
But I still don't feel absolutely certain that Ivanka, I'm not so sure, but Jared, I'm not 100% sure I understand him at all.
Okay, moving on. We have a little bit of time left. We're going to do a little bit of quick listener reaction, and then, I feel bad. Last week's podcast, our anniversary podcast, lasted almost 2 hours.
People don't care.
Oh, I apologize to put you guys through that marathon of podcasts.
And it went on for 190 minutes.
Okay, well, we try keep it lively, folks. So let's go to
Jane.
Jane.
I will say more and more people are sitting down to listen to 3-hour long podcasts.
Oh my God, it's like the Fidel Castro podcast. We don't want to become that.
I aspire to the Fidel
I would never
Castro
do that to
model.
our listeners. Sorry.
That's funny. Okay, so we do have some listener feedback. First, we're going to come from Gabrielle. And she says, just listening to your Good Sheila, Bad Feminist podcast, and have to say, Christina, that I saw the first part of a video featuring your appearances in Melbourne and Sydney with Roxane Gay. I had to turn it off. I couldn't stand it anymore. The smirking at every sensible thing you said, the booing of keywords, capitalism, etc. I felt ashamed of my countrywomen and glad I no longer live there. Anyway, just in case your ego needs a boost after the frightful bullying tactics you endured, can I just say that you have some very loyal, loving fans? I found you a couple of years ago when Spanish feminists started mixing reasonable claims with unreasonable ones, and I needed to find any feminist anywhere with whom I might agree in order to avoid having to newly label myself an anti-feminist.
So there were friendly.
I'm verklempt. And I'm honored, and thank you. And I was bullied.
You were bullied, and you can now, I think, file a triggering whatever against the people who held the debate.
Maybe I could file a PTSD charge.
I think so. We'll figure it out. We'll get our lawyer, our
I'm going to get my lawyer on it.
All right, that's very sweet. Thank you, Gabrielle.
And then this listener is all the way from India. I'm a listener of the podcast from India. I've just watched the video, and
this is the Roxane Gay video.
Yes.
Oh boy, this is it's going viral, Christina.
It's viral. They've watched it in Guam.
And I have to say, there is just something wrong with Roxane Gay and her fans. What absolute nonsense she spouts. As a woman who is from a country where women were burned to death on their husband's funeral pyre as late as the 20th century, I was appalled at Gay's refusal to condemn forceful hijab. And who are we to decide what they should do? Hypocrisy. It's shameful to say that she calls herself a feminist.
Well, this is what Tina Brown brought up to those who survived the entire podcast. That it felt like a little bit like that old Jerry Lewis telethon, except we weren't fundraising for kids. But no, Tina Brown said this, that we brought up that example of Western feminists with her who would not condemn these atrocious things that are going on in other countries. And she was just astounded that that could even be a feminist position, that she was very rightly dismissive of it. Horrified.
It's horrifying, and I've encountered it for years because there are so many women in this country that are invested in depicting the state of women in the United States is living in a state of siege. We're in this patriarchal rape culture. No, we're not. We have problems. All things aren't fair, but we don't have to be burnt on our husband's
maybe they have
funeral pyre.
Right. Well, maybe they have sexism envy, like we have to make our problems seem as bad or we can't.
It's true. Is that now because
when those burning ladies make their case, it makes us look kind of
wimpy,
kind of childish.
Up our game, lady.
Okay. Any more, Jane?
Yeah, we have a personal story from David that is pretty adorable. Okay, one personal.
This is not my David. This is a David, right?
And not my David.
And
not your David. Yeah.
Someone said we shouldn't talk about our kids or our dogs.
What?
I don't know. A critic said we talked.
Who is this critic?
I don't know. An Izzy aversion personality.
We don't talk a lot about our children except to occasionally make fun with them, but
yeah,
and they come on to explain to us.
They said they talk about our kids and our dogs.
Wow.
It was one guy.
So don't
obviously
listen.
A mansplainer gone wrong.
Don't listen.
Continue.
Sorry.
Gone very wrong.
Yeah.
One personal story. I was taking my oldest daughter to work with me to go to backup childcare. She was about 3 years old or so, and I had a stroller, diaper bag, etc. with me. I was loaded down and carrying the stroller up the stairs. There must have been about 10 times.
This was in the subway, right? He was in the subway with us. Yes. Okay.
Yes. There must have been about 10 times that people, mostly women, offered to give up their seat on the subway or otherwise expressed to me what a courageous and devoted father husband I am to be managing with my daughter all by myself.
Oh, that drives me nuts.
I told my wife about these comments that people made, and she said that basically the rest of the other days of the year while I'm at work, she is the one who has to deal herself with our 2 children. At the time, now we have 4, and nobody makes comments, offers assistance, or appears to be paying attention in any way. She thought it was evidence of a double standard, that it should somehow make me a hero to do half of her job for one day. My contention is that I probably got more sympathy than she did because I was more effective at projecting an air of helplessness and incompetence. And because I was also dressed like I was on my way to a job at an investment bank, it was assumed that I must have otherwise been good at something.
He doesn't say who are the women offering to help and giving up their seat because this is like clickbait for women. A man in a suit.
Although I say one thing that's even better is a man with a really cute dog.
David told me this years ago. We had a dog that he felt somewhat embarrassed to walk before we got Labradors.
A chick dog?
And he would go out, but he said when he walked this dog that women instinctively knew it was not his dog and that he was very nobly, like this guy, quote unquote, nobly taking the children out. And this was their way to suddenly, assert themselves because it was attractive to them. Oh, here's a man who's not ashamed to take a little.
He's not ashamed. He's attentive and he's
look at
confident.
This investment banker man struggling with a stroller. I think you were just getting hit on, friend, but it is true.
Can you get his number?
But I side with the wife on that one. That's super annoying because
Not to me.
I agree. I agree. There's, it's not. We're not going to go all Roxanne Gay on this, but there is a little bit of a double standard.
There's a little bit of Roxanne Gay over there on my angry.
A very little bit.
But a very little bit. In fact, and it'll betray itself in 1 minute. So just wait.
All right. Well, I think that's it. Remember to, I'm going to make this pitch. Okay, I am going Jerry's Kids on us. Please support us on Patreon or We Gather. We have to make this podcast work outside of a paywall. And so if you like listening to us and hanging out with us, please consider going to patreon.com/femsplainers or wegather.com/femsplainers. And you can join and you can ask us questions. We do a private, exclusive,
Like after this podcast,
Last
there's a
Call
whole other
podcast.
section.
and you're missing
it.
So, and we even have levels you could actually call into the show. So please help support us. And otherwise, cheers. Thank
Au
you.
revoir.
Hey, thanks for listening to the Femsplainers. Stay with us by following us on Twitter and Facebook at Femsplainers and on Instagram at Femsplainers Podcast. You can always email questions and comments to contact@femsplainers.com. We read every one.
We are recorded at the American Enterprise Institute in Washington, D.C. And thanks to AEI Research Assistant Zoe Appler, who is our production assistant here in the studio. And thanks to Nat Frum, our audio and video editor, and occasional millennial mansplainer.
And listen to us on pretty much any of your favorite podcast platforms. And please remember to subscribe and like us at iTunes if possible. Every like helps us keep our solid 5-star rating. Cheers.